So welcome everybody to the latest edition of the Power Up webinar series. Tonight's discussion is about off-season resistance training for cyclists and triathletes, and it's presented by Ashley Weaver. She's one of the coaches at Power Up. She has a BS in exercise physiology and an MS in human performance with an emphasis in exercise physiology. She's also a certified personal trainer and is a Cat 1 racer and races for LA Sweat, which is a team based out of California. So in a normal season, she would be racing all across the US. Well, about this time of year it would have been, it'd be over, but she would have been racing all across the US. So anyway, without further ado, Ashley, it's all yours.
Awesome. Can everyone hear me?
I can.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Just want to make sure I didn't accidentally mute myself. Okay, awesome. So today we're going to talk about just an inside look on how to integrate a strength training routine into your already existing endurance program. Okay, there we go. So a little bit about me. Jim had already mentioned, I have my BS in exercise physiology from Midwestern State University. I came up here, got my MS in human performance from Lindenwood University. I'm a bike racer. With experience, I have been an assistant strength and conditioning coach at MSU. I work with the guys on the football team there, men's and women's soccer, women's track and cross country, women's softball, women's volleyball, men's and women's tennis. So while I was in that role, I got to see a lot of different sports, which was pretty cool. I've been weightlifting for probably about a total of 10 years now. I did a little bit in high school, but I don't know if I would quite call that weightlifting. And so throughout my whole entire college years, all the way up until now, equals to 10 years. I've been personal training for over 5 years. And then, so with lifting weights, I've worked from healthy young athletes to all the way to patients that are attending intensive cardiac rehab. So I've really got to see both ends of the spectrum and everyone in between. And currently I am waiting for 2021 to get my CSCS certification, just because otherwise I would get it and then have to pay another fee this year because they're renewing it for next year. So yeah, so we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, so what this webinar is, it's just to give you an insight on how to incorporate a strength training program into your already existing endurance program. What this webinar is not, it's not a complete detailed strength training program that everyone should follow. If you've listened to any of Jim's talks in the past, you should already know everyone's individual. There's no one size fit program for everyone. And there's a funny little meme throughout. I don't have weekdays on my calendar. I only have strong days. Thought that was pretty funny. Okay, so why strength training? Why do we need to do it? I will quickly go through this. It can get way more in depth. But just to start off is, first of all, it increases lean muscle mass, which is good for us. Your muscle fibers become larger. You can see sometimes fiber type transitions. So type 1 fibers may take on some characteristics of a type 2 fiber and vice versa. That's something cool that we can get with strength training. The architecture of your muscles will start to change. You will get better enzyme utilization and then substrate concentration. So like ATP, creatine, phosphate, your body will get a lot better at using those substrates. Next, we'll go on to connective tissue adaptations. So stuff like we've already said, muscle fibers will increase, your bone mineral density will increase, the connective tissues your tendons and ligaments will all increase, which ultimately will reduce the risk of injury. Fortunately for cycling and triathletes, it's not if you will crash, it's when you will crash. And so whenever that day comes, you want to make sure your bones can withstand that crash so you don't have any injury. And then also with the muscles being there as well, you want to make sure that they're strong and durable so you can quickly bounce back. Next, we'll go into, you'll see an increase in neural recruitment. Generally within the very beginning of somebody starting a strength training routine, you'll see all of these great increases in their weights, their movements and everything. And this is all generally due to being able to recruit your motor neuron units. You'll see a better hormone responses. So stuff like testosterone, growth hormone, some catecholamines like epinephrine, neuroepinephrine, stuff like that. You'll see a little bit of cardiorespiratory response and increase in that. So generally, like if you're doing heavy weightlifting, sometimes you'll know your breathing rate will increase, your heart rate starting to get up, you're sweating, which is kind of nice with that. You will increase power, your rate of force development, so how quickly you can accelerate on the bike or sprint. Then you increase in muscular strength and power. And then lastly, mainly is you increase your cycling economy, so a steady rate of oxygen cost for a standard output power. So you'll just become a lot more efficient in that. And over to the right, you can kind of see this chart that we have with endurance training and resistance training, and then how they kind of affect all of these other things. And to be a very good, well-rounded athlete, you need to have a balance of both endurance and resistance training. I will go next. Okay, so where do we start? First of all, you need to talk to your coach. So your endurance coach, just so that they are on the same page as your strength training program. Because if you are doing all of this endurance training and then you decide to add in this resistance training without communicating with your coach, you can get very fatigued very quickly and increase your rate of injury and potentially like burnout. So you definitely want to be able to mesh those programs together. Secondly, hire a personal trainer, a strength coach, somebody who is very familiar in programming for athletes, and particularly endurance athletes. There is definitely some crossover with team sports like soccer, baseball, into endurance, but you generally need somebody who understands the type of training that endurance athletes, like cyclists and triathletes do. Next, usually if you hire a trainer or a strength coach, they will perform a sports needs analysis. So they will look at the sport that you do. So like for me, it's a criterion. They will look at the types of movements, how fast you're going for how long, some of the physiological analysis, and then injury analysis. So how often do you crash? What are the most common crashes, types of injuries seen, and then also maybe some overuse injuries that are seen within the sport. Next, you will look at the individual athlete. So you'll do an athlete assessment, evaluate their strengths, their weaknesses, how their body moves, etc. And then next, you will look at their training status. Are they a beginner or untrained on the bike or run or swim, or are they more advanced or intermediate? And then you will also look at that when they're in the weight room. Are they just beginning, or have they been doing this for a while? And so that will absolutely determine how you progress them from the beginning. Note, if you have any kind of pain or discomfort, you'll need to see a physical therapist before you start weightlifting program. Do not think a personal trainer or strength coach can help you get rid of your injury. So that is number one. I have so many people who come to me and they talk about the injuries that they have, and I have to report or have them go see a physical therapist first. Okay, next. So this will be very quickly. Jim's talked a lot about this in his previous talks. So ideally, you want to start with creating an annual training plan. So first of all, you have your macro cycle, a period of training that can last several months up to a year. So for it's basically your off season and end season. The next, from there, you go down and break it down into your mesocycle. So it's it can be anywhere from 2 to 6 weeks. And this is kind of known as your training block. And the goal of that is to assign it a specific target adaptation that you want to see. So whether it's you really want to work on your endurance in this block, or if you really want to work on your power in this block, you need to have an idea about that. And then from there, you'll go into a microcycle. So a training period of several days. It can be up to 2 weeks, but for most people, it's usually 1 week. And so usually, say a typical person, athlete, it'll be 4-week mesocycle with 3 weeks building and then 1 week rest. And so you always want to incorporate that rest week there. And then from there, you'll kind of go down smaller and we'll start planning the individual workouts. So next, so a few considerations before we begin. You want to make sure you know when your season begins and ends. You want to know what your A races or events are, what your B races, events, and what races and events you don't really care too much about and that you will just train through. Next thing is, what does your daily schedule look like? How many times can you actually get to the gym during the week without causing more needed stress or lack of sleep? Because we don't really want to take away from sleep. We want to make sure we're getting enough sleep throughout the week. Next, what kind of equipment do you have access to? Are you going to the gym right now? Are you, because of COVID, are you doing more home workouts? That's something you need to have an idea about. And then what are your physiological needs for the events that you're doing? So say for a time trialist, somebody who's doing more steady state or a stage racer, we'll have a different program than what a crit racer or a track racer is doing. And so you need to know how to plan your training goals to fit your A races and B races. Next thing, one little reminder is do not try to confuse the body by throwing too many conflicting signals at it. So like say if you're in the gym, one day you do strength endurance, you don't want the next day to be a power workout. You're just going to confuse the body and it's going to be kind of like an overload and your body's going to reject it. And you will probably not see any adaptations and could lead to plateau. Okay, so this is another quick thing. So the duration of residual training effects, this is something we kind of want to keep in mind when we start planning the ATP. So your annual training plan. So you have aerobic endurance. So this is as long as you're still exercising, where this may not be the main focus of that block. So your aerobic endurance will kind of stay around about 30 days plus or minus 5. And then we kind of go down from there. So maximum strength will stay there for about 30 days plus or minus 5. And aerobic glycolytic endurance, 18 days plus or minus 4. Then you have strength endurance and then max speed. And you can see the days there. So that's something we kind of want to keep in mind whenever we're actually planning the ATP. So on my screen, you can see this is just a very basic outline. Nothing's filled. At the top, you can see the dates. The competitions, we'll start filling those in, and then we won't worry too much about the cycling training, and we'll focus mainly on the strength training for this talk. So we'll go next. So here, we're starting to plug in some races. We can see we have Tuesday Night Worlds. We can see we have Joe Martin as our A race. Tulsa Tough is just a B race. We kind of want to see how our fitness is. Intelligentsia Cup, we kind of want to see how our fitness is, and then we're not peaking again until we get to Gateway Cup. Generally, you don't want to do I wouldn't say too many more than 2 races a year to peak for. If you get too many above that, you're really stretching your body thin. So after that, we kind of start building it from there. We start breaking our year up into little phases, and this is just a generalization. You and your coaches will have to be flexible, because it may start out like this and it may have to completely change throughout the year. But this is just to kind of give you a guideline. And so you can say we start off with strength endurance, hypertrophy. We really want to build a good foundation before we start moving into like max strength. So here you can kind of see that we have strength endurance, hypertrophy, and then we go into a block of max strength, and we kind of go back to strength endurance, really making sure we have a good base before we start throwing more weights, more complicated movements, and we're going to go to max strength, then we try to convert that strength to power, and then we start focusing on max power as we're getting closer to the races, and then we have a little peaking phase, and then at the end, after Joe Martin, you can see we have kind of like a transition, kind of like to back off a little bit, kind of as a recovery period within the season. Okay, so we have all of that. We have our microcycles and everything planned. Now we actually have to start planning our workouts and the exercise selection. So a few considerations before we actually get down to what exercises we want to use. We have to know our equipment that's available to us, whether we have exercise bands, medicine balls, stability balls, weight machines, free weights, plyometrics, and or body weights. We need to know how many times per day. What's the length that we can spend in the gym? In the off season, you'll generally see about 2 to 3 days per week. Generally, you'll do a full body workout. Since we're athletes, we use our whole body while we exercise. So there's no reason why we should separate days like leg day, arm day, anything like that. They need to be full, complete upper body, core, lower body workouts. In season, you may see about 1 to 2 days if the athlete can keep it up. This is a big key, is when you get training a lot, traveling a lot, it does get a little difficult to try to keep up a quote unquote strength routine throughout the season, but it still needs to be full body workout. And this can even be some light band exercises before getting on the bike and kind of using it more as a warm up. Next, we need to know our training goals for that period of time. We need to think about sports-specific movements and then also non-sport-specific movements. So we are cyclists, since we go pretty much in one direction. We don't do much things laterally. It's not to say that we shouldn't do things laterally, because if we do those lateral movements, it will help to strengthen us overall and make us well-rounded athletes, and helps prevent us from creating weaknesses and imbalances within the body, which is huge, since we do so many revolutions a minute for hours and hours a week, that if that's not taken care of, it can create injuries and issues. Key reminder is majority of all cyclists will have weak posteriors compared to their anteriors. So all the way from the back, your traps, lats, delts, your low back, your glutes, your hamstrings, they will be much more weaker and lengthened as compared to like your chest, your pecs, your abs, your quads, your hip flexors. And it's just the nature of the bike. Like when you're on the bike, you're hunched over, all the posterior muscles get lengthened and elongated, whereas all the ones in the front, they become short. And so you definitely have to do a little like balancing with that. Maybe work a little bit more exercises like rows, hamstring movements compared to your anterior side. Let's see, and never let your friends skip torso day for all cyclists. As cyclists, one thing I do see a lot is that they don't think that they need to do upper body, which is you absolutely should. And it's just to be able to balance out the amount of power your lower body is producing. You have to keep yourself stable. And so you can't have really strong legs and a really weak upper body and expect to hold a straight line and be able to produce a good sprint. Next, next we want to determine our core or main exercise. And then we want to figure out what our assistance exercises are. So in this instance right here, don't confuse core as your ab exercises. It can get a little confusing, but it's just your main exercises that day. So generally these exercises are some variation of either a squat, a deadlift, a bench press, or overhead press. So it could be a front squat, a sumo deadlift, a dumbbell bench press, a dumbbell overhead press, or some variation of that. And those are only because they are the most direct application to all sports. And the reason why is they do recruit one or more large muscle groups. So say a squat, you have your quads, your hamstrings, your glutes, you have your core, to be able to do just that one exercise. And they are also multi-joint exercises. Whereas with your assistance exercises, it's stuff like bicep curl, leg extension, calf raises, tricep extension, and back extension, etc. And so these recruit a lot smaller muscle groups, and then also there generally are more like single joint exercises. Next, you want to know with the phases you're in, are you doing more structural exercises or are you doing more power exercises? So like in the beginning of a training program, in the off season, you may do more structural exercises. So this would be something kind of like just your basic back squat or your deadlift, whereas like power exercise is something that's done at a quicker movement and you're really trying to produce as much force as quickly as possible. So an example is kind of like some of your like Olympic lifts, but you don't necessarily have to do Olympic lift to make it a power exercise. There's a lot of good substitutions there. Generally, you want to keep your workouts about 5 to 8 exercises of a core, so your main exercises and assistance exercises. If you do too many of that, you're going to fatigue yourself a lot, and then you're also just going to spend a lot more time in the gym.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Fatigue is how you get stronger, though.
To a point. But this is also about quality. And so if you're fatiguing to the point that you're losing quality of the exercise, then there's no point in doing exercise because you're eventually going to injure yourself. And so generally this is about like the good range of exercises before you start seeing people really starting to fatigue. Now there are professional athletes that can do a lot more than this, but it's because they have the time, they have a nutritionist there, they like do all of these things, right? But like say if you have 8 exercises, say we start with back squat and let's do compound set with bench press. Let's say we're doing a heavy day. You're gonna want about 2 to 5 minutes rest between each one. And so if you're doing 3 sets of 5 reps, just resting itself, you're already taking about 15 minutes. And so that's why you kind of want to keep it on the lower side, is because for your typical average person, they're not going to have a whole lot of time. They're not going to have hours and hours to spend in the gym if you do a proper warm up and a proper cool down. And this, I wouldn't say this 5 to 8 exercises includes like your core, like abdomen and lower back and glutes. I wouldn't include that into this, this range. And then remember, every exercise you do is a core trunk exercise. So whether it's squat, you need to focus on your core, your deadlift, you need to focus on your core. Everything you do, you should have it in your mind that you need to keep your core activated. And your core is anywhere from like the shoulders, your abs, your obliques, your lower back, your glutes. So basically anything connected directly to the trunk of the body. Okay, so next we'll move on to methods of resistance training. What are some things we can kind of change up in order to either increase the intensity or increase the workout or decrease it? So we have volume load. So this is the amount of work done. So you have, this can be manipulated with sets, reps, and load. So the weight you're lifting. Then you have the intensity. So a percentage of your specific repetition max. Next, we go into the total number of repetitions. So it's the number of times an exercise can be performed properly. Then you have the number of sets, series of reps performed continuously, followed by a rest interval. Then we have the rest interval, the amount of time between sets where you are actually resting, sitting down, getting a drink of water. Then we can also manipulate exercise order. And this is just the sequence of exercises that you are performing in that given workout. And then lastly, we will discuss loading patterns, so prescribed rep and intensity scheme. There's a lot more you can manipulate within a workout, but these are your general basic ones that we will discuss for today.
Jesus Christ.
So next we'll talk about reps. So number of reps performed is based on the load. So it is an inverse relationship. So we have higher the load, the lower number of reps. So higher the weight, the lower amount of reps. And then we have lower the load, the higher amount of reps. And so if you look down below, you can kind of see the rep scheme. So first one, we have strength. We want to pay attention to what is in the yellow. So if our training goal is strength, we should generally stay around the 1 to 6 range. If we're focusing on power, we should generally stay around between the 1 and 5 range. Then we have hypertrophy, 6 to 12, and then muscular endurance is 12 and plus. I will say, actually we will talk about this in a little bit. So sets. How many sets should you perform? Some things you have to think about is, are you beginner versus are you an advanced athlete in the room? If you're a beginner, you're gonna do less reps. If you're more advanced, you could probably push it up a little bit more. And then also, what training phase are you in? So if you can see this chart on the screen, we have the training goals. So whether we're focusing on strength, power, underneath you have single effort. So if you're doing just like 1 or 2 reps, or if you're doing multiple rep efforts, so 3 to 5 rep for that. And then we have hypertrophy or muscular endurance. And so you can see the goal reps and then the goal sets for each of those. And so this is something that you definitely need to keep in mind, is that your goals, reps, and sets should mimic what training goal you're trying to achieve. Next, we'll talk about volume load. So this incorporates sets and reps with load. So the weight that's being lifted. So key to endurance athletes. So high volume, which means low load, so low amount of weight for a lot of reps, increases endurance. However, with us being endurance athletes, we already get enough endurance on the bike. So a lot of things that we don't get on the bike is max strength, max power, and those are something that we could do within the gym. If we have you guys try to do as much endurance as you can on the bike, plus a lot of endurance in the weight room, it's going to lead to injury. So say you're lifting, you're doing a program, the weight is starting to feel a little light, and you're wanting to know if you can increase weight. So there's a rule called the 2 for 2 rule, and it's If an athlete can perform 2 or more reps over the assigned rep goal in the last set in 2 consecutive workouts. So this is, so say Mondays are my squat days. So I did 12 squats on Monday, plus 12 squats next Monday, no issue with perfect form, then I can increase the weight. So with upper body, you're probably gonna increase the weight anywhere 2 to 5 pounds, maybe a little bit more, whereas like the lower body, you could probably increase it up 10 to 15 pounds with that. And so the chart below, you can kind of see how we can adjust and play with the volume load based on the percentage of the 1RM. You can see that all of these back squat sessions were done at total reps, but depending on the intensity that we had, times, so the weight being lifted times the reps, times the sets can actually increase your volume load, even though they were all done at 30 reps total at the end. So next we have intensity, and this is just to give you like a quick example as, oh, can we have somebody turn off or mute? Let's,
her husband was kind of crazy. He's a
okay, there we go. So next we'll talk about determining the percentage based on your typically, so you'll do this typically based on either like a 1RM, 3RM, 5RM, or even a 10RM. If you do some type of repetition max, you will absolutely need to have a trainer there or somebody who knows what they're doing. And I would not suggest anybody new to the weight room do this. There's other ways you can do it. And if you look at this chart right here, if you look under like the maximum exertion, near max exertion, hard exertion, medium hard exertion, you can see max reps, 1 rep short, 2 reps short, 3 reps short, and so on. And so after you do a workout or an exercise, given the weight, you ask yourself, well, how many reps would it take me to go to failure or not hold perfect form? And so that kind of gives you an idea of, okay, I think at this given weight for back squat, I probably could have gone maybe 5 reps more before I hit quote unquote failure. So failure, remember, is you're just not holding good form. It doesn't necessarily mean that you're collapsing to the ground. And so say I do that, and let's say I do it for 10 reps and I knew I could go to 15, it's probably gonna be about a 67% of your 1RM. Does that make sense? I'm gonna assume silence is a yes. Okay, so load and rep assignment based on training goal. This, we're gonna talk about the intensity here. So we have strength, power, same training goals that we've seen previously. And so with the load or percentage of your 1RM, so for strength, it's gonna be anything above 85% of your 1RM or whatever RM you're doing. Or yeah, your 1RM, sorry, I misquoted that. So power for a single effort, you want anything to be between 80 and 90% of that 1RM for only 1 to 2 reps. If we start doing more multiple efforts, so 3 to 5 reps, we really want to see that a little bit lower, about 75 to 85%. If we're doing a hypertrophy phase, we want to be about 67 to 85% of your 1RM for about 6 to 12 reps. And then muscular endurance is anything below 67% of your 1RM with over 12 reps. Okay, so rest periods. This is based on what your training goal is of that cycle. And so And the reason why we want to give ourselves rest periods is to allow for good quality reps. And that's the biggest thing, is that quality aspect of it. So if we're in a strength phase, we want to do about a 2 to 5 minute rest period between that exercise. So say we do back squat, we do 3 sets of 5, we rest 5, or we do 1 set of 5, we rest 5 minutes, then we go back to that 1 set, we rest 5 minutes. So that's going to be how it's set up. For power, any single effort, you want to, and multiple effort, we're going to be in that 2 to 5 minute range. This may this will fluctuate a little bit if you're really tired and maybe it's a really bad day for you. You may want to give yourself a couple more minutes. That's not going to hurt. With hypertrophy, we give ourselves about 30 seconds to a minute 30. And then with muscular endurance, we want to see rest periods below 30 seconds to attain that training goal. And then here's a meme on the right, in between sets. It's not a rest for me, it's a rest for the weights. Okay, so we're gonna talk a little bit about exercise order. So this is a sequence of resistance exercises during a workout. This is based on how one exercise affects the quality of effort or the technique of another exercise. So first, you must identify your exercises. So let's say we have back squat, bench press, lunges, inverted row, and so on. Then are we going to perform supersets, compound sets? Are we going to perform each exercise individually? Those are things that we, as a coach or an athlete, you need to think about. So supersets is if you were to do kind of the opposing muscle groups. So say like for bench press, you're working your pecs, your chest, and then we pair that with like some kind of row exercise, things that work the back. And then a compound set, and this is the one that I probably use the most with myself and athletes, is you do a squat paired with like a bench press, because they're two different muscle groups, but you're able to do them back to back. And so it's a lot more time efficient if you're trying to just get in and get out. You want to make sure you do your big, powerful movements first. So those core exercises, those multi-joint that hits multi-muscle ones, you want to do those first. Basically work your way big to small, or complicated to more simple. And so that's generally the way you want to structure every workout. And it's just so that the big exercises like squats, deadlifts, bench press, overhead presses, those can be very fatiguing and very taxing. And if you're doing those when you're already fatigued and taxed, you're going to end up injuring yourself. And so that's why we want to do those big ones first, is when you're feeling your most fresh. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about loading pattern. So there's 2 different ways to look at this. So loading pattern for an individual exercise. So we'll say deadlifts, we'll do 3 sets, 6 reps, and then you can see the percentage of the 1RM. Let's start at 82.5% of our 1RM. In each rep, we kind of add weights. So that's one way to adjust the loading pattern. And you can reverse that. Start at 87 and work your way down. Next is you have a loading pattern for the training week or block that you're using. So the most general ones is either linear periodization or undulating periodization. So linear follows the same volume and intensity throughout the week and may slightly increase throughout the training block. So it's a very nice line increasing. Whereas undulating, it's the acute variation of volume and intensity throughout the week. So kind of example below, it says day 1, you may do a moderate intensity. Day 2, you may do a higher intensity, quality focus with a lower volume, so lower number of reps. Day 3, it's a higher volume and lower intensity. Given that, you still want to make sure you're working within the percentage of your 1RM, so that we're still focusing on the training goal, but say the moderate intensity may be at 80% of your 1RM, whereas like the high intensity, lower volume, you may do like 85% and do low number of reps, say 2 to 3. And then the high volume, we do 75% of that 1RM, but we maybe do 5 or 6 reps. And this way it's actually more athletes are starting and coaches are starting to lean more this way in the weight room. And it's just so that you can go into the weekend feeling fresh. So you can kind of see day 3 is just a higher volume, lower amount of weights that you're doing, and so that you can kind of recover before those long rides on the weekend. Whereas if you were to do more linear periodization, you may be flat completely throughout the whole entire week. So this is just a way to manipulate your training. Let's see. Okay. So next we'll talk about the warm up and cool down. If you have a time to warm up, then you absolutely have the time for a proper warm up and cool down. I see so many athletes that just go to the gym and go straight to the weight rack and don't even bother about warming up. So we want to work our way from general to specific throughout the workout, about 5 to 8 minutes of slow, low aerobic activity. So this could be the row machines, really great, jogging, cycling, whatever you guys enjoy. Followed by some kind of mobility, dynamic movement, muscle activation exercises. So this is really just to prime the body. So with mobility, you have thoracic rotations, you have scorpions, cat-cows, bodyweight squats, the thoracic rotations, etc. This is where you can get a bit creative in your workouts. Next, we have muscle activation. So stuff like glute bridges, clamshells, prone snow angels. And this is one of the things you want to think about is, what are your problem areas? So an example for me is my back, my glutes, and my hamstrings, which makes sense, I'm a cyclist. And so I make sure I do these muscle activations to kind of wake those muscles up, and so that they're ready to go once I'm hitting the weights. Next, we go into some kind of dynamic movement, something that you're moving a lot more. So you had lunges, something like an under over, lunges with a twist. You could do more body weight squats, whatever you guys enjoy. And then you want to work into more of a specific warm up. So something that mimics your core lift. So an example I have here is back squat. We want to do 5 reps of all of these intensities. So 5 reps of the bar, which is about 45 pounds generally. Then you have 65%, 75%, and 85% of whatever your starting weight is for that day. So say if you're lifting 100 pounds for back squat, you're going to do 65 pounds, 75 pounds, 85 pounds to kind of work your way up. Cool down, super simple. You can incorporate a light aerobic activity, maybe 5 minutes. I wouldn't go anything longer than that. And then you want to perform some kind of full body static stretching. Afterwards, you do not want to do static stretching beforehand. Make sure you hold the in position for about 15 to 30 seconds. You can go longer if you have like really tight hip flexors. You can absolutely do that. Focus on having good posture throughout all the stretches. We don't want to be hunched over, leaning over. We want to be nice, proud, strong. And then remember to breathe throughout all the exercises. Just kind of a review of the process. We want to make sure we have a needs analysis, athlete assessment, determine the target objectives for the ATP. We want to define the macro cycle, outline the basic structure of the mesocycle, construct the individual microcycle plans, determine the structure of the training days, and then we finally get to the individual workouts. Few safety tips is, so the biggest thing I want you guys to take away is technique, technique, technique. if you're not going to do proper technique, there's no reason to go to the gym, because you're just going to set yourself up for failure. And this is where a coach can come in and make sure you're doing it properly. This is, I would say, the best bang for your buck. Then, or you can also use like your phone to videotape you, and you can do that way, but it does take a little bit longer. Next, we see a lot of people wearing weight belts. If you're not doing a maximal effort and you're having to wear a weight belt, you should probably work on your core more. If your core is not strong enough to hold the bar, and that is not you're not doing a max effort, then we definitely need to add in some core exercises like planks, dead bugs, maybe some dynamic movements like planks and stuff. If you're lifting on a squat rack, you want to make sure you always have your safety bars up. You never want to start squatting or anything like that without safety bars, because if you, for whatever reason, something happens and you have to drop that weight, those safety bars are going to be there to catch that weight. Next, we have the barbell locks and collars. On this lovely picture to the right, you can see there's a little collar on the barbell to hold the weights in place. We always want to make sure we have those on, because if you're lifting and you lose your balance or something and you're leaning over to one side, you want to make sure that weight's still going to stay on, so you're not going to create a disaster, because if one weight falls off and the other weight's going to fall off, you're going to lose your balance and it's just going to be bad news. Next, spotters are always a good idea, especially if you're going to do anything like over the face, like bench press. You absolutely want a spotter, but you must have a good line of communication. Next, a little bit about footwear. You want to have like a solid sole, or even barefoot if your gym allows it. A lot of gyms don't do that, but you also want to be cautious of your toes getting smashed in weights. Do not lift in running shoes, and the reason is because the soles are too thick and they're going to create instability in your ankle. So you really want a more solid shoe. Make sure you breathe throughout your exercises. Exhale through the sticking point. Leave the Valsalva maneuver to advanced lifters. And so this is where you'll see a lifter like taking a big breath of air, hold it, and then perform the lift. You want to make sure you don't want to run the risk of doing that, because the risk versus reward of that is not really beneficial for us as cyclists. Those are should only be done for actually like weightlifters, power lifters, stuff like that. Make sure we have the proper hand grip. You don't want to do too many lifts, at least like free weights, where your thumb is over the bar, so it's more like a hook with your hand. You want to make sure your thumb is over, so it's connecting with your fingers, so you have a secure grip on the bar. You want to make sure your body is stable and your limb positioning is in good position, proper place. With any standing exercise, you want your feet positioned about a little outside hip width apart. You don't want to hold too narrow, because that's a good way to potentially lose balance. If you're in a supine, so laying on your back, or seated lift, if you're doing any of those, you want to make sure you have 5 points of contact. So that means your head, your right and left shoulder, your low back, and your right and left foot. Those must maintain contact to the floor or the bench that you're sitting on. You don't want to have any of those lifting in the air. You don't want your feet up in the air. All of that could lose balance with that. Range of motion, you want to make sure you're going through a proper range of motion while maintaining good posture. You don't want to be going down and your knees caving in. Those are going to show some weaknesses. So we want to make sure that we're correcting those movements as we're maintaining a full range of motion. And then ultimately, I want you to think about risk versus reward. So this picture on the right, you can see this is why emergency rooms exist. This might be good for some athletes, but for a lot of them, the risk versus reward of this is not worth it. So many things can go wrong in this picture. So ultimately, that's what I want you guys to think about whenever you're in the gym lifting, or maybe if you see another person doing an exercise that maybe looks interesting, ask yourself, what are the things could go wrong? And then, is this worth it? This is like some resources and articles. Any questions?
Ashley, this is David. I have a question.
Hey, David. Yeah.
After a weekend of, let's say, 2 or 3 races or so forth, how soon, and you prepped for the weekend, how soon should you go back to resuming your weightlifting program?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the art of coaching. So it depends on so many things. It depends on like, what's the next coming weekend? Are you racing? How much are you traveling? What equipment's available to you? So for an instance like me, if I'm traveling, say for a solid month, I'm not going to be able to really get to a weight room consistently. So I am going to have to rely a lot on like exercise bands to have with me, and like some body weight exercises throughout the season, because the season you ideally want to just focus on like maintenance. You're not going to be building much of any power or any of that if you're on the road consistently racing from weekend to weekend to weekend. So yeah, so like for me, I do rely a lot on exercise bands to do. You can do full body workouts, which are really great. But yeah, so say if I raced Saturday, Sunday, I would take Monday complete rest and kind of evaluate myself, and would probably do like a Tuesday, Thursday, like light workout, if it's in the season. And it would probably be more like a warm up to whatever my bike ride was for that day. If that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Ashley, are there any, considering the audience and considering what their emphasis is, are there any must-do exercises that cyclists and triathletes should definitely include into their program?
Yeah, I would say do a lot of hamstring and glute exercises. So obviously you do incorporate, a lot of athletes and a lot of people in general will do like deadlifts and back squats for like lower bodies, which is good. And it does incorporate like the glutes and hamstrings. But from my experience with like myself and then with working with some of the athletes that are cyclists, you really need to work those hamstrings, because on the bike, they're so they're stretched, and you do work them a little bit on the bike, but not to the same emphasis as your quads. So stuff like a Romanian deadlift, like RDL, single leg RDL. So if you're wanting to get a little bit more unilateral, hip thrusts, or glute bridges. So stuff like that, stability ball leg curls, I would say add in a hamstring exercise and then maybe even a glute specific exercise into like every day. And then even on top of that, if you want to take it a little bit further, rows. Like I think rows are really good, or like a delt fly, something that really works that back. Because if most of you know, you look at cyclists, and even if they're off the bike, they look like they're hunching over. And it's because the chest is so tight and then the muscles in the back are so elongated, is that we really need to work that back maybe a little bit more to make sure we keep everything nice and straight. Because we don't want to, in our real lives, we don't want to get to the point where we're having upper back issues, because then it's not worth it if it's affecting our daily lives.
Another question, how many, in terms of lifting, and I'm sure this varies throughout the season and what phase you're in, but how many days a week would you recommend lifting? And how many days of recovery between the lifting days? Recovery being like, not lifting.
Yeah, absolutely. So generally during the off season, for most, I would say cyclists and triathletes will probably change a little bit because they are running, swimming, biking. As far as like a cyclist goes, I would probably say in the off season about 2 to 3 times a week. Something that you can fit in your schedule that's not going to add more stress, because that's the last thing you need, is just to be stressed out to make a workout. So about 2 to 3 times a week during the off season. For triathletes, I'd probably say about 2 to 3 if they can get it in. I know that triathletes, they're doing a lot of other things, and so it may be a little impossible to get 3 in. Whereas in season, you're looking at maybe 1 to 2, and it's really just to kind of maintain as much as you can throughout the season, because we do have a long season as far as like cyclists goes. And so it starts in mid-March and goes until maybe mid-September. And so just to try to like maintain as much as possible, like its core strength, stability. If you're able to lift weights, you can absolutely do it as long as it's prescribed appropriately. Sometimes if you are working with somebody who doesn't quite understand the whole aspect of like racing and just cycling, the sport in general, it can get a little difficult with trying to go to the gym, because they want to make sure you do like 100 burpees and you're like, what, I have a race this weekend. So in season about maybe 1 to 2, and like I said, it can even be part of your warm-up if it's a little difficult for you to carve out some time to go to the gym. And then also the time during the season, it's going to be a lot shorter time spent in the gym. For as far as like rest between workouts, you generally want 48 to 72 hours. Some people, for whatever reason, may have a very hard time bouncing back after just say a normal lifting session. And so there are instances where I've heard of people can only lift once a week kind of thing. And everybody's body is different. They do react differently. And so there are instances like that, but for most people, it's about 48 to 72 hours between lifts.
Ashley,
Yes.
is there a suggested mix of strength work and flexibility?
Well, so the nice thing with weightlifting, and as long as you're going through full range of motion, you can get pretty flexible. So a good way to develop flexibility. So let's say we're doing a Romanian deadlift or an RDL, or even like a straight leg deadlift. If you're going nice and slow and you're holding the weight and you're going through the full range of motion of your capability, each time you do that, it's gonna give you a little bit more flexibility. And then also, always need to stretch after workouts. That's gonna help increase the blood flow and kind of help you recover to get you ready for the next workout. Was that your question? I may have gone on a tangent.